Hi, in this session, I'm going to walk you through the basic interface of GameMaker Studio. And the screen you see right now is basically the screen that'll launch as you launch GameMaker Studio, and it gives you some options, including a large area with your general tips that you, if you so choose, could toggle through and read a bunch of them. A different one comes up every time you load up GameMaker Studio. Any existing projects will show down here, and here are some areas where you can open an existing game file, create a new one, and if you notice down here, it'll ask you for the directory and the project name where you want to place this. Just to keep in mind, when you save a project in GameMaker Studio, it will create a directory, and all of the assets, objects, backgrounds, everything will be stored in that folder. This is a little different from the way GameMaker 8 stored everything in what appeared to be one file. So this comes into play as well later when you want to transfer a game, because you would want to export the game and then import the game into wherever your new destination is, and that way it will maintain the integrity of the folder and file structure when you export it. So this is where you would go to import an existing game. Okay, there are some demos and completed tutorials that you could play around with, and then this news is fed in from the GameMaker blog, and finally it'll indicate your license as well. Okay, so anyway, so now I'll go back here, and actually I'll go to new. I'll create a new folder. I'm going to choose the directory. In this case, I'm going to put this in my folder, and I'm going to create a new folder within here called GameMaker Projects, and that's where I'm going to save this. So now it's going to be in GameMaker Projects, and I'll call this From Alcatraz. Not very original, but there we go. To show you the screen now. So in this case, this again is the general interface that you'll see when a new project is open, or when any project's open. Your resources are all listed over here with the folders that they would be stored in. We'll go over this in much greater detail in the upcoming tutorials, but sprites are where you'll store the graphic images that you plan to use in your game. Think of it as like your library of images that you'll be using, not the actual objects that you'll program, because that'll go under the objects. Always like to distinguish the difference between sprites and objects. Sprites are simply the graphic images. Objects are what you program. So the object will be associated often with a sprite, meaning that that's the image that object will hold, but the object is what's programmed. The sprite is simply the image. Sounds, as you start to either create or find sounds for your game, you'll store them here. Background images, paths, we'll get into when the time comes, but paths are basically predetermined paths that an object might follow in a game. Meaning basically the pattern that it would move or something to that effect. If you get into GML, the GameMaker language, your scripts would be stored here. Shaders, fonts, timelines. Timelines basically are just if you want things to happen at certain time intervals during the game, they would be stored there, which is different than using timers and things, which we'll talk about as well. Objects, again, are the elements in your game that can do stuff that we'll program. Rooms are the playing fields that we'll be using. Each level would be a room, essentially, and so on. And we'll go through any relevant areas as we get going in the future. Just so you see up here too, you've got your file menu. This is where you could default to a new project, open an existing project, import or export a project like I was talking about, save, etc. Creating an application will actually create an executable installer file that you can give to somebody, and whether or not they have GameMaker won't matter. They'll be able to install that game as a freestanding game and play it. Your typical edit menu, resources, which is very similar to what we have here. So here I could right click to create a sprite, or I can go to resources and create a sprite. Likewise, I can use the quick toolbar here to create a sprite, a sound, etc. So there are different places you can do these things. Here are the scripts. This is basically to run or run in debug mode. This is going to compile your game and let you play it in this environment without necessarily creating an executable or whatnot. It's your, as you create your game, it'll compile it so you can play it right now, etc. Okay, so that's the basics in terms of the initial user interface. Everything you're working on will show up over here. So like as I create a sprite, then the dialog for that comes over here, and you can name your sprite, you can load a sprite, etc. When we're dealing with our rooms, and I create a room, this is the area where I can indicate where everything in the room will go, and likewise different elements of that room. But this will all come in good time. I just want to show you that this is what the environment will look like. Okay, so thanks for listening, and much more to come.